It didn't look like a divorce hearing. It looked like a performance choreographed by money and sharpened by pride. Nathan adjusted his cufflinks like he was preparing to accept an award, not file a motion to erase my name from his life. Elaine Prescott swept in wearing pearls thick as armor, her glare brushing over the courtroom like disinfectant. Tessa was there too, seated close, her dress the exact shade of champagne she once spilled on my sketchbook. They looked so certain. So untouchable. Then the judge called my name. I walked forward and placed a single leather briefcase on the table. No tears. No theatrics. Just the truth they never thought I'd dare to say. I'm Camille Prescott, 33. Software engineer by day, digital artist by night, and I never needed a cent from them. He said it like a closing argument, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear, as if it were the one truth no one dared to say. She only married me for money. Nathan Prescott, my ex-husband of 8 years, the man who once told me I was his muse, the man who held my hand while I cried over my first lost pregnancy, now stood in a tailored navy suit in front of a judge, arms folded with self-righteous ease, accusing me of being a gold digger. I sat in silence, my palms resting flat on my lap, the fabric of my black dress smooth and uncreased. I wore no jewelry, no lipstick. My hair was pulled back in a neat twist. I wanted to look like I was there for business, not sympathy. Behind me I heard the faint rustle of silk and whispers. Elaine Prescott, Nathan's mother, always made her presence known. Her perfume lingered like obligation, thick, sweet, and suffocating. Well, you can't expect more from a girl who paints for a living, she had once whispered to her country club friends. She's very modest, she'd say, drawing out the word like it tasted bitter. Today, she sat 2 rows behind me, flanked by her carefully curated circle of women, all in pastel suits and pearls. One of them let out a stifled laugh when Nathan's voice echoed again across the courtroom. 8 years, Your Honor, he continued, pretending to address the judge while still staring at me. 8 years of paying for canvases and art supplies and not a single dollar back. No job, no contribution. My lawyer Harold King didn't flinch. He scribbled something on a yellow notepad, then placed a firm hand on my forearm. Not yet, his gesture said. I nodded. Nathan paced once theatrically, like he had seen on those legal dramas he watched late at night. I provided everything, he said. A home in Lake Oswego. Cars. Private healthcare. Vacations. And in return I got someone who locked herself in a studio and painted pictures of horses. I felt my jaw clench at that. They weren't just horses, but this wasn't the moment. Your Honor, he said again, returning to his seat beside his attorney, a man who looked barely 30 and far too amused for a divorce trial. I tried, Nathan added, his tone shifting to faux vulnerability. I really did. But she never wanted a family. Never wanted to be part of mine. That part, I admit, almost made me laugh. Elaine let out a breathy sigh behind me, like the line had touched her deeply. One of her friends murmured something sympathetic. My chest felt tight, but not with sadness. It was something else. Not anger. Not shame. Something steady rising. Judge Whitmore, a woman in her late 50s with tired eyes and a reputation for zero tolerance on theatrics, finally spoke. Let's proceed with the formal statements. I watched Nathan lean back in his chair, smug. He thought he'd won the room. He always did. I glanced around. Courtroom 6 Ampere wasn't packed, but there were enough observers, journalists, interns, maybe a few interested members of the community who recognized the name Prescott. Nathan had insisted on making this public. He wanted the narrative. The powerful CEO married a girl who just wanted his bank account. He had no idea what I'd brought with me in that black leather briefcase at my feet. I adjusted the sleeves of my dress and met his gaze for the first time. He looked at me with the same condescension he'd worn for the last 3 years of our marriage. The look he gave me when I asked about the missing payments from his company. When I questioned why Tessa, his assistant, was at every investor dinner. When I stayed quiet and he mistook that quiet for compliance. He looked away first. Harold leaned in. Ready, I breathed in slowly. The courtroom light felt cold even though it was barely 70 degrees outside. Yes, I whispered. Across the aisle, Elaine whispered something sharp to the woman beside her, probably about how I looked plain, like I hadn't even tried. She didn't know I had spent the morning organizing files. Not makeup. Not accessories. Files. Your Honor, Harold said, rising with practiced calm. My client would like to request permission to address the court. Nathan smirked. He had no idea. The judge nodded. Miss Prescott, proceed. I stood. The courtroom went quiet. Even Elaine's group fell still. I reached down slowly and lifted the briefcase onto the desk. The locks clicked open. And just like that, the story Nathan thought he controlled began to slip through his fingers. I was 29 when I married Nathan. It was spring in Oregon, soft sunlight and dogwood trees in bloom, and I remember thinking this was the kind of love that didn't need a contract or conditions. My grandmother Ruth had just passed 6 months earlier. She left me everything. $3 million tucked away in a Swiss account she'd managed privately since the 1982nd. 5 rental properties in Eugene and Bend, each with long-term tenants and steady income. A tidy little empire built by a woman who never raised her voice but never once let anyone silence her. Before she died, she took my hands and told me plain as rain. Camille, love with your heart, but guard with your mind. Your peace is worth more than any diamond. I heard her voice in my head as I signed the marriage license with Nathan. I didn't tell him about the inheritance. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I didn't want it to define us. I wanted our marriage to be about building something new together, not protecting what I already had. At the time, Nathan was charming and determined. He was in the early stages of expanding Prescott Construction, and every day he came home full of concrete and deadlines and long-term vision. He liked that I painted. He'd bring me coffee in the mornings and say things like, "Let the world catch up to your mind." But that Nathan started fading around year 2. Elaine, who had always been poised and polite in public, started inviting me to fewer and fewer events. She called them investor dinners, charity luncheons, partner retreats. I was always left off the RSVP. Then came the conversation in her kitchen. It was the summer of 2017. She poured tea into china cups she never let me touch and set one down in front of me like she was offering peace. "Camille," she said, smoothing a napkin over her lap. "I hope you understand. The Prescott name has obligations." She slid a document across the table. A post-nuptial agreement. It stated in careful legalese that I would not be entitled to any share of Prescott Construction in the event of divorce. That all existing and future company assets would remain solely under Nathan's ownership. That I would make no claim ever. Elaine smiled like a politician. "This is just a formality, darling. To protect the company, you understand." Nathan stood behind her silent. He didn't speak, he didn't touch me, he just watched me read it. I remember the tea going cold in my hand. I signed it. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to argue. I told myself we were fine. That sometimes when families have legacies to protect, they ask for things. That Nathan would see I didn't care about the money, that this was all temporary. But after that day, everything shifted. He stopped coming to my studio to see my work. Stopped asking about my sketches. He started answering texts from Tessa late at night and disappearing on weekends for what he called site visits. I miscarried our first and only pregnancy that fall. It was early. Just 6 weeks in. But it felt like the end of something I couldn't explain. I sat on the bathroom floor for hours that day. Nathan wasn't home. Elaine sent a one-line message when I told her. "Let me know if you still want to come to the Prescott Foundation dinner." There was no warmth. No comfort. That was when I started saving everything. Receipts, statements, emails. Little things Nathan thought I didn't notice. A plane ticket to Palm Springs when he told me he was in Seattle. Dinner charges on the company card from a luxury restaurant in San Diego, 2 entrees, wine pairings, and no business clients in sight. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I documented. I watched. And I waited. Because if I had learned anything from Ruth, it was this. A woman's silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it is strategy. The silence gave me space to think, to plan, to understand exactly what kind of man I had married. He thought I was passive. He thought I had no options. But I knew more about leverage than he ever guessed. I knew that trust once broken becomes data, and data over time becomes power. Especially in court. Especially when the man sitting across from you is about to realize he is not the only one who prepared for this day. Judge Whitmore asked for my opening statement. Harold gave me a subtle nod. I closed the briefcase, lifted my eyes, and began. The air in the courtroom held a tension I could almost taste, like the seconds before a summer storm finally breaks. But long before I had gathered bank statements, before Harold had organized evidence into binders, and before Judge Whitmore even knew my name, there was a moment, quiet, humiliating, that shifted everything inside me. It happened at a party. Nathan's 39th birthday. Elaine had insisted on hosting it herself. She rented out the rooftop of the Marion, one of those newly renovated boutique hotels in downtown Portland that used reclaimed wood and Edison bulbs to convince wealthy people they were still somehow grounded. From the moment I stepped out of the elevator, I felt like a guest at someone else's celebration. The string quartet was playing Vivaldi, and the guests, developers, city council donors, investors, and their spouses, clustered into groups with the ease of people who'd known each other for years. I recognized maybe 5 faces. None turned to greet me. At the welcome table, I searched for my name among the calligraphy place cards. Camilla Prescott. The A was missing. The last name was misspelled. I stared at it for a second too long before pocketing it and walking in. Nathan was across the room wearing a navy blazer that fit too perfectly to be anything but custom. He stood with Tessa Monroe, his assistant, who was laughing at something he'd said. Her dress was emerald green, fitted and expensive, and her hand was resting lightly on his forearm. Elaine saw me before he did. "Camille," she called out with a smile so practiced it could have been rehearsed. "How wonderful of you to make it." She kissed the air near my cheek, then stepped aside so someone could hand her another glass of rosé. Nathan looked over and gave me the barest nod, the kind you offer a distant colleague, not a wife. "This is Tessa," Elaine said, her voice lifting. "She's been such a gift to our family and the company." Nathan's right hand. Tessa smiled, her lipstick sharp against her white teeth. I managed a nod. "It's lovely to meet you," I said. She turned back to Nathan before responding. No one asked where I'd been. No one commented on my dress or even mentioned my work. Elaine quickly moved on to another guest, someone from the city planning office, and I was left standing beside the carved fruit tray holding a champagne flute I hadn't even wanted. Eventually, I found my assigned seat. It was at the far end of the patio near the swinging kitchen doors. A staff member brushed past and apologized, mistaking me for event support. The table wasn't full. A few strangers offered polite smiles. One man was on his phone the entire time. My name card wrong, as it had been placed upside down. The napkin was paper, not linen. The glass had water spots. From where I sat, I could barely hear the speeches, but I saw enough. Elaine stood near the cake, holding a mic like a senator addressing her base. "Tonight is not just a celebration of Nathan," she said. "It's a celebration of leadership, of legacy, of vision." She turned to Tessa and reached for her hand. "And behind every great man is a woman who makes the machine run. Tessa, you have been that woman for our family and our company." People clapped. Someone whistled. Tessa laughed like she didn't expect the praise, though her shoulders lifted with pride. I stayed seated. I didn't clap. I sipped my water and looked straight ahead. The knife didn't land all at once. It turned slowly, inch by inch. Later that night, back at the house, Nathan poured himself a drink and sat on the couch like nothing had happened. "Fun party," he said. "You should thank your mother," I replied. "She worked hard." He didn't catch the bitterness in my voice. I took off my earrings in the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked the same, but I didn't feel like me anymore. I opened the drawer where I kept old sketchbooks and pulled out my tablet instead. I opened a new folder. Title: Evidence. I began with a list. Nathan's birthday, misspelled name card, seating by the kitchen, Elaine's public praise of Tessa. No acknowledgement of Camille, Nathan's silence, I added photos I'd discreetly taken of the seating chart, the card, the speech. A part of me hated myself for needing to do this. But a louder part whispered that I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing this because the narrative was being written without me in it. They had started to erase me long before I picked up a digital pen. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just wrote. The folder would grow. It would fill with timestamps and transfers, invoices, and silence. But it began here. At a table near the kitchen where no one noticed I had arrived and no one noticed when I left. Except me. Of all the people who were supposed to stand by me, I never thought it would be Valerie who'd twist the knife. It started with a text. Simple, vague. Camille, we need to talk about the showcase. Can you come by early? I'd been preparing for this moment for months. My hands were still stained with oils from touching up the edges of the final piece. The gallery walls had been freshly painted. My name had been printed on the invitations. I thought it would be a conversation about logistics. Maybe lighting. Maybe a last-minute adjustment to the order of the installations. But the moment I walked through the back entrance of Marlowe Gallery, I felt it. That shift in the air. The kind of silence that sits heavy and makes you brace for impact. Valerie was standing by the main hall, her arms crossed, her usual warm smile replaced with something tight and rehearsed. The walls where my pieces were supposed to hang were bare. They weren't just bare. They were being filled with other works, not mine. Bright, chaotic digital collages from someone I didn't recognize. I didn't speak right away. I just stared as two gallery assistants carried in another canvas and leaned it against the wall where my centerpiece was supposed to go. Valerie finally spoke, her voice low. Camille, I'm so sorry. Something came up. I turned to her slowly. My throat tightened. What do you mean something came up? She glanced around as if trying to avoid the staff overhearing. It's complicated. Prescott Construction offered to sponsor a new series. They've invested a significant amount. This artist Juno Steele, he's gaining traction. They wanted him as the new face of the exhibit. There's press involved. A donor gala, you're canceling my show. For a construction-backed influencer, it's not just that. It's business, Camille. You know how things are right now, the gallery's barely hanging on. They offered to pay for the entire quarter's rent, and my work. I had to take a breath. My eyes burned. Your work is beautiful, Val said. But it's not commercial enough. Not right now. It felt like I'd been sucker punched. This wasn't just a delay or a creative disagreement. She'd taken my moment and sold it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to remind her of the nights we stayed up building this place from the ground up using folding tables and borrowed lights. I wanted to bring up the 3 years I helped her curate unpaid just to keep Marlowe's afloat. But instead, I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't argue. I just left. Because I saw it in her face. The decision was already made, and it wasn't hers alone. That night, I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by canvases. Half-finished pieces stared back at me like ghosts of something that almost was. My phone buzzed with notifications from people asking if the show was still happening. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened my laptop and typed the name I hadn't used in years into the blank profile form. Luna Noel. It was a name I'd used in college, a pseudonym I signed to sketchbooks for fun before life got complicated. Before my name meant anything or nothing at all. I built the portfolio overnight. Selected my most visceral pieces. Photographed them with bare lighting. No edits. I uploaded everything to an anonymous digital art platform and quietly minted them as NFTs. No fanfare, no PR. No gallery sponsors. Within 48 hours, I sold the first one. An abstract called Soft Collapse. It went for $82,000. At first, I thought it was a fluke. Some crypto collector taking a risk. But then another sold. Then another. Within 2 weeks, 5 pieces were gone. One of them, Blood, Concrete, sold to a private buyer in Singapore for over $250,000. No one knew who Luna Noel was. And I intended to keep it that way. Valerie sent me emails. A few texts. Most were layered with apologies and vague offers to reschedule when timing allowed. I didn't reply. Instead, I reinvested the money into a cold wallet, set up a new LLC under the alias, and started planning my next release. Quietly behind the scenes, I contacted 3 digital art houses under the Luna identity. I didn't need galleries anymore. Didn't need permission. I'd found a backdoor. Camille Prescott may have been shut out of the art world, but Luna Noel was just getting started. And unlike before this time, I owned every stroke, every coin, every choice. My parents didn't know. Tessa didn't know. Valerie didn't know. They thought they'd removed me from the spotlight, but I'd simply found another room. One without their rules. One they couldn't enter. I wasn't seeking revenge. Not then. I wasn't plotting anything dramatic. I just wanted space. To create without asking for approval. To exist without being edited. But silence has a way of echoing back. And as I watched Luna's account grow in value and reach in recognition, I realized something else. They'd taken everything they could tie to my name, so I gave them nothing. And somehow nothing was starting to look like everything. By the time I pulled up in front of the little cedar house on Woodlark Avenue, the sky had turned a soft lavender. The wind smelled like fir trees and dry pine needles, and for a second it was like I had never left. The gravel driveway crunched beneath my boots just the way it did when I was 13, sneaking in past curfew and hoping Ruth hadn't heard the door creak. Of course she always had. The porch swing was still there, faded from years of sun, but gently swaying like it remembered my weight. I sat down without thinking, running my hand along the chipped armrest. A sudden memory knocked the wind out of me and Ruth sitting here after I got rejected from my first art show in Portland. I'd cried so hard I hiccuped. She'd just listened, then handed me a glass of lemonade and said softly, "Never let silence be the proof of your worth, Camille. You speak with your work, but when they silence your work, you find another language." I hadn't understood that back then. I think I do now. The front door opened before I could knock. It was Harold, looking a little older than I remembered, his graying hair combed back, glasses perched low on his nose. He wore that same expression he always did when Ruth was about to scold me, but didn't have the heart to do it herself. "You didn't call," he said. "I could have had the place ready." "I didn't want it ready," I replied. "I just needed to see it as it was." He nodded and stepped aside, letting me into the house that still smelled faintly of old books and eucalyptus. Everything was just where she'd left it. The little wooden bowl of marbles on the windowsill. The photo of her and Grandpa at Cannon Beach. The faded quilt draped over the arm of the recliner. Harold had set up a stack of folders on the kitchen table, thick with tabs and sticky notes. I stood at the threshold, unsure for a moment. Then I walked over and sat down, heart thudding like I was about to open a time capsule from another version of myself. "So," I said quietly, "what did she leave behind?" Harold adjusted his glasses and opened the top folder. "There's the UBS account. 3 million, give or take. She kept it under the radar. Said she didn't want you tied to this family's name financially until you knew who you were without it." That sounds like her. 5 properties across Oregon. 3 in Eugene, 1 in Corvallis, 1 in Grants Pass. All paid off. All rented. Your name's on the deeds now. I stared at the pages. Deeds, titles, balances. Numbers so big they looked like fiction. But none of it felt like a win. Just the echo of a woman who had loved me without condition and wanted me to have tools she knew I might one day need. I asked, "Did she leave a letter?" Harold reached into his coat pocket and slid out an envelope yellowed slightly at the edges. My name was written on the front in her looping cursive. I opened it with fingers that trembled. "My dearest Camille, if you're reading this, then the world has likely tilted in ways you didn't expect. It always does. I want you to remember that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet and patient, sometimes it waits. I didn't raise you to grovel. I raised you to walk away when the room no longer deserves you. I hope you find your voice again, however it wants to speak. These assets are not your victory. You are. With love, always, Ruth." I folded the letter slowly, pressing it against my chest like I could absorb her voice back into my skin. Harold sat quietly, eyes on the grain of the table. "You don't have to decide what to do today," he said after a while. I already have. I'm not touching any of it. Not yet. He raised his eyebrows slightly. If I use it now, it'll feel like I needed saving. Like I wasn't enough on my own. Ruth knew that. That's why she never told me about the money. And now I know I don't need it. Not for this. Harold smiled, a small thing filled with approval and grief. You sound like her, you know. I hope so. Later that night, I stayed in the guest room with the window cracked just like I had when I was a kid. The wind rustled the maple tree out front, and the floor creaked with every shift in temperature. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of a house that had once held all my beginnings. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't fighting either. I was building. Tomorrow I would fly back to Seattle. Luna Noel had another digital piece going to auction. But tonight I let myself belong to a version of me that still believed in lemonade on the porch, in the smell of eucalyptus and old quilts, in the strength of a woman whose name no one had tried to erase. Not yet. Not ever. By the time my plane touched down in Seattle, the clouds had already rolled in like they knew I was coming back different. I stepped off with a carry-on full of sketchbooks and a heart that no longer needed anyone's permission to be full. The city felt colder than I remembered, not in temperature but in tone. Nathan didn't text, he didn't call, he didn't need to. The silence had become its own language and I had stopped translating it. That night, as the streetlights flickered through our bedroom blinds, I sat in the corner of my studio, the one he never bothered to ask about. My monitor glowed soft blue, casting shadows over half-finished canvases and tangled cords. I opened the folder named Wild Horse. File by file, I layered her back into motion, this creature I had imagined as myself. A horse made of smoke and flame, shattering every chain they tried to bind her with. She wasn't graceful, she was fury made visible. While Nathan drank wine with investors in Manhattan, I was negotiating royalties with a gallery in Berlin. He thought I stayed home to rest. In truth, I had never worked harder in my life. Each night he left was a night I used. While he posted stories of rooftop cocktails with Tessa tagging her under the table, I posted nothing. Luna Noel posted everything. Valerie came by one afternoon. She let herself in like always, a bouquet of peonies in one hand and a bag of overpriced macarons in the other. She talked about herself for 20 minutes straight while I stirred honey into tea. Then, in a voice she thought was kind, she looked at one of my digital prints and said the words that must have tasted sweet on her tongue. You're still doing these. Elaine always said you were a hobbyist, not a real artist. But hey, at least you're keeping busy. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I smiled. The way Ruth had once smiled when someone told her lemon trees didn't grow in Oregon. That night I finished the third panel of Wild Horse. The flames on her mane twisted into a crown. I didn't tell Valerie that piece would headline a virtual exhibit across 5 countries. She'd see it when the time was right, or not. It didn't matter anymore. Sometimes I wondered if they ever thought of me while they were together. Nathan and Tessa. Did he tell her he loved me once, that I had named our dog? That I had painted the mural in our hallway, each bloom carrying a memory he said he'd never forget? Or did she only know the version he served on a silver tray, edited and cruelly convenient? I stopped checking his location. I stopped asking when he'd be home. When he came back smelling like her shampoo, I'd excuse myself to the studio. And there, under the hum of the computer fan and the low buzz of city life, I built something real. Bit by bit, Luna's collector base grew. Crypto bids poured in from Paris, Seoul, Dubai. Some nights I could hear their excitement through the screen, strangers thrilled by a digital mare running wild through fire. Camille Nathan called from the hallway one evening. His voice slurred slightly. You ever think about coming with me to New York sometime? Just to, I don't know, see what I do? I kept my back to him, one hand on the stylus. The 4th panel was almost done. The chains had melted. The horse's eyes now mirrored my own. Calm, focused, free. That's all right, I said. I've got my own deadlines. Cool, he said, already halfway down the hall. You're just, yeah, busy. Got it. The next day I shipped 3 signed prints under my alias to a private collector in Milan. They paid in Ethereum and the funds cleared within seconds. I used none of it. The money from Ruth remained untouched. The digital empire I was building was entirely mine. Clean, earned, anonymous. When Tessa launched her new jewelry line and tagged Nathan as executive advisor, I turned off my phone. That evening, I started the final piece of Wild Horse. This time the background was quiet. No flames. Just a dawn sky and the silhouette of the horse walking free, her hooves no longer bound to fire but light. I hadn't decided whether to auction it yet. Maybe I'd keep it, frame it. Hang it behind glass where no one could say it wasn't worth something. Or maybe I'd burn it like they burned every version of me they couldn't control. I hadn't decided yet. But that night I slept. The next morning my inbox was full. Elaine had forwarded a stack of legal documents through the company's legal team marked urgent, review and sign today. The top file was a glossy deck labeled Strategic Reintegration of Offshore Capital. That was their euphemism. In reality, it was a scheme to redirect investor money through a fake shell company Nathan had set up in the British Virgin Islands. I sat at my kitchen counter, coffee in hand, scanning each page. There it was. Line item 47C. A transfer of $4.8 million to Greyhawk Ventures Limited. I clicked through to the entity's records. The address listed was a P.O. box. No actual board. No operations. Just Nathan's name as strategic advisor. They didn't even bother to hide it well. Around 10, Elaine called. Her voice was tight, polite in the way someone is when they assume you'll fold. Camille, we need your signature by close of business. The board's voting on the reinvestment structure Friday. Nathan's already signed and we're moving forward. I kept my voice even. Elaine, I can't sign this. Greyhawk Ventures isn't real. It's a shell company and this is textbook money laundering. There was a pause. Then a cold laugh. You always were dramatic. This is how modern capital works. And I'm not asking, Camille. I'm telling you. If you want to maintain any stake in the firm your father built, you'll sign the damn paper. I didn't respond. I ended the call, walked straight to the safe in my study, and pulled out the folder I'd built over the last 6 months. Bank statements, wire transfers, screenshots. A full timeline of transactions between Tessa, Nathan, and their fake ventures. That afternoon, Nathan showed up unannounced at my condo. He still had a key. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said, stepping inside like he owned the place. His tone was cool, calm, like he was giving me one last chance to be reasonable. You committed fraud, I said, walking past him to the kitchen. You used my name and signature to move funds into a fake company. That's not business. That's a crime. He shrugged. Camille, no one's going to investigate this. These kinds of transactions happen every day. This is how we stay ahead. And honestly, you should be thanking me. This will double the firm's valuation in a year. I turned, resting my hands on the counter. Is that why you married me? Because I made your firm look legitimate. He didn't answer. 2 days later, I received a petition for divorce via courier. Not an email. Not a conversation. A legal envelope dropped at my door like a dead bird. Inside, the documents outlined a complete financial severance. Nathan claimed I had contributed nothing of monetary value to the marriage, that I was unfit to manage assets, and that I had interfered with lawful business activities. There was a note stapled to the top. 3 sentences. Sign and return by Friday. This doesn't have to be ugly. Let's end this like adults. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I called Ethan. They're cornering me, I said quietly. And I think they think I'll just take the hit. Ethan exhaled slowly on the other end. Camille, do you still have the documentation? Everything on Greyhawk? Yes. And more. Tessa's brokerage firm is tied to it too. I've got their entire chain of fund movements mapped out. I even traced 2 of their clients, one's a shell for an Eastern European arms syndicate. There was silence. Then Ethan spoke again, calm and deliberate. Then here's what we do. First, we send an official tip-off request to the IRS's Criminal Investigation Division. Second, we file a motion with the court to delay the divorce proceedings based on pending financial investigations. And third, you request to present your financial evidence publicly. Publicly, yes. Full disclosure in open court. If they want to call you irrelevant, let them do it in front of a federal judge. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see it. Okay, let's burn it all down. By the following Monday, I was in the courthouse filing my formal response. I refused the asset separation clause. Instead, I submitted a 58-page addendum detailing fraud, misappropriation of marital funds, and use of forged documentation. Attached were 3 sealed affidavits, one from a financial forensics expert, one from a former contractor hired by Tessa's firm, and one from me. Elaine called again the next day. She sounded different this time. Less powerful, less sure. Camille. Let's not escalate this. You're still part of the Prescott name. That comes with a responsibility to handle things discreetly. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. I think we define discretion very differently. And I hung up. That evening, a process server delivered a countersuit. They were suing me for defamation. I read it while pouring wine. The irony was almost poetic. They lied, laundered, and fabricated, then accused me of ruining their name. But the real blow came the next morning. I received a call from a journalist at the Sentinel. She had received a copy of the divorce motion from a source close to the family. They were trying to discredit me in the press before the hearing. She asked for comment. I said nothing, then asked if I could call her back later. I sat on the floor of my condo, back against the cabinet's file folder spread open across the tile. My life, my real life, laid out in spreadsheets and bank statements. They thought I'd fall apart, but I didn't. I made 2 calls. One to Ethan. One to the IRS agent who'd responded to our tip-off with a single sentence. We're interested. Please proceed. I took a deep breath and reached for the brass clasps of the old briefcase that had sat silently by my feet for the past hour. It clicked open with a sound louder than expected in the echo of the courtroom. The hinges creaked softly, like it too had waited 8 long years for this moment. I pulled out a small stack of documents, each in clear plastic sleeves labeled in my careful handwriting. Then I stood. I didn't look at Nathan. I didn't need to. His silence told me everything. I addressed the judge, my voice, steady, even almost gentle. Your Honor, before this court proceeds with any division of assets or a discussion of alimony, I'd like to offer full financial disclosure from my side. What I'm about to show is not for rebuttal, it is for record. I walked slowly to the clerk's desk and handed over the folders. Then I turned to the courtroom. 8 years ago, just before my wedding, my grandmother Elaine left me a trust fund. $3 million. Unrestricted. I never told Nathan because I didn't think I had to. We agreed to build a life together, to earn our keep, to live with integrity. I paused, watching Nathan shift in his chair, his jaw tightening. Throughout our marriage, I never used a single dollar from that account. Not for groceries, not for vacations, not for rent, even when he insisted on moving us into that overpriced condo in Bellevue. Every bill I paid from my salary. Every birthday gift I bought for his family came from my freelance contracts. Every time his sister's kids needed something, I covered it from my own savings. Because I thought that's what love did. It showed up. Behind me I could hear murmurs, tiny rustlings, a breath caught here and there. I didn't look back. Nathan, on the other hand, told people I married him for money. That I was draining him. That I'd landed a cushy life and spent my days playing house while he worked 80-hour weeks. But let me be clear. I have bank statements from the past 8 years. Not 1 cent of his income was ever touched for my expenses. Not even for coffee. I brought my own. I packed my lunch. I wore the same 3 pairs of shoes for 5 years. Because I wanted to be independent even in marriage. And then came the hardest part. But when I realized my independence was being weaponized against me, turned into a story of entitlement, of manipulation, I understood something very clearly. It wasn't about money. It was about narrative. And Nathan, you spun one without ever asking me who I really was. Nathan's attorney leaned over, whispering rapidly. Nathan's face turned red. His mother, seated 3 rows back in her navy suit and pearl earrings, looked like she'd swallowed ice. Her hands clenched around the strap of her handbag. I remember those hands. They used to hand me pies at Thanksgiving with forced warmth. Now they looked like claws on leather. I turned back to the judge. I'm not angry. Not anymore. But I'm tired of being misunderstood. So let me say it plainly. You said I married you for money. But I never needed yours. I walked back to the witness stand, lifted the remaining folder and opened it to a page highlighted in yellow. These are wire transfer records from my grandmother's account, untouched since the day she signed it over to me. $3 million earning modest interest never withdrawn. You'll see that the only activity is quarterly reporting and annual tax payments, all paid from the interest itself. The judge looked over the papers, his brow furrowed in concentration. I closed the folder. If I had wanted money, I would have used it. If I wanted status, I wouldn't have chosen to work 16-hour days from a converted guest room building financial models for startups who couldn't pay on time. What I really wanted was to build something real with someone who saw me. Who didn't just tolerate my ambition but understood it. Who didn't whisper jokes about my spreadsheets at dinner parties or tell his friends I was playing Office while he ran the real show. Nathan was no longer looking at me. He was staring down at the table, his fingers tapping in a rhythm I remembered from every anxious conversation we ever had. The same rhythm that used to drum against our kitchen counter when he couldn't admit he'd forgotten our anniversary. Or when I caught him lying about working late. I looked at the judge. I'm not seeking damages. I'm not asking for alimony. I just want the record to reflect the truth. Not the version they've passed around over wine and barbecue, but the actual facts. The judge nodded slowly. We'll take this into account. I turned back toward my table. My attorney gave me a small nod. No smiles. Just quiet understanding. As I sat down, I could feel all eyes on me. But for the first time in months, I didn't shrink under the weight of them. Across the aisle, Nathan's lawyer leaned in and whispered something again. Nathan jerked his head, slightly annoyed, but he said nothing. That silence. It was louder than any accusation he'd ever thrown. The court called a 5-minute recess. I stayed seated. My hands rested on the table, fingers gently tapping the edge of the briefcase. The same one my grandmother gave me when I graduated college. It still smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish. The moment I opened it today, I knew. This wasn't about winning. It wasn't even about being heard. It was about standing up and saying, this is who I've always been. And if they couldn't see that until now, it wasn't my loss. The lights dimmed just a touch, the way courtrooms sometimes do when the projector whirs to life. The silence was thicker than before, not tense but expectant, like the collective breath of the room had been drawn, and no one dared exhale. I clicked the remote in my hand. The screen lit up behind me. A painting appeared. Red, orange, black, wild strokes slashing across the canvas like a storm uncontained. It was fire and fury and chaos. It was heartbreak and defiance and something primal breaking through. The title appeared beneath it, Wild Horse, artist Luna Noel. I let it linger there, not saying a word. Then came another. And another. Each piece more explosive, more visceral. They weren't gentle portraits or sterile abstracts. They were raw, untamed emotions stretched across canvas, sold in private showings, sealed deals, collectors who whispered her name with reverence. Luna Noel had been the art world's fever dream for the past 5 years. I looked over at Nathan. His jaw tightened. His left leg bounced once. He knew that name. He had chased that name. But he hadn't known it was me. The room was still so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat as I stepped closer to the screen. I opened the folder in my hand and pulled out the first sheet. Here are the authenticated contracts of sale, I said calmly. All signed, all verified. The piece on screen now, Wild Horse, was sold 3 months ago to McIntyre Holdings for $6.8 million. A soft gasp somewhere behind me. That sale was made under a limited liability company registered in Delaware. I own it. The transfer went through 3 layers of shell protections. Just like Nathan taught me when we were younger, and he used to brag about his old funds methods. He shifted in his seat. The final buyer, I looked him directly in the eye. Your largest direct competitor. The one who just acquired your patent dispute case and pulled out of your Series D round last minute. He blinked. Hard. His lawyer whispered something. He didn't respond. I turned back to the screen and clicked again. More contracts. More headlines. More sales. Each one verified time-stamped traced to Luna Noel. A name I had carried like armor and like chains depending on the day. Behind me, whispers had begun. Quiet but urgent. Elaine's hand gripped the edge of her seat like she needed it to stay upright. Tessa was whispering frantically to her lawyer. Valerie, sitting closest to the exit, shifted toward the door. I raised my voice slightly enough for everyone to hear. You all said I was nothing without Nathan. That I was riding his name, his world. That I was lucky to be tolerated. I looked over my shoulder, pointed at the screen. That is what I built while you erased me. The silence was absolute now. No rustle of suits, no tapping heels, just the full weight of everything they hadn't seen coming pressing in. I turned toward the judge. Your Honor, these disclosures are not meant for drama. They are part of financial disclosures related to our divorce proceedings. My assets, independently earned and maintained, were previously withheld for privacy and safety. They are now being disclosed in full compliance with court procedure. The judge nodded, his face unreadable. The opposing counsel asked for a recess. Denied. I clicked once more. The final image filled the screen. Wild horse again. But this time the buyer's identity was in bold at the bottom. It wasn't just a competitor. It was the one who had recently poached 3 of Nathan's top executives. The timing hadn't been a coincidence. There was a slow, audible intake of breath across the courtroom. That piece was painted the night Nathan told me I was a placeholder. I said quietly. I didn't paint it to sell it. I painted it to survive him. I stepped down from the platform and walked back to my seat. No dramatic glance. No anger in my steps, just clarity, solid and unshakable. As I sat, Valerie made her move. She stood, suddenly muttered something to the attorney beside her and started toward the back of the courtroom. But she didn't make it halfway before a bailiff stepped in her path. Her face froze. She turned back toward Elaine. Elaine didn't even look at her. Her gaze was locked on me. And for the first time I saw something in her eyes that had never been there before. Fear. Not of me, but of everything she hadn't known, everything she had dismissed, everything she had helped destroy. Tessa leaned forward, her voice urgent, too low for me to hear the words, but I saw the panic in her gestures. Meanwhile, I just sat there. Still. Calm. Like the eye of the storm they had tried to summon against me. And I didn't need to lift a finger. Because the truth was burning everything down on its own. The courtroom air felt thick, the kind that doesn't move no matter how many ceiling fans whirl overhead. I reached into my folder and pulled out the final stack of documents. My fingers didn't shake. I didn't blink. My voice was steady as I walked to the center and handed the evidence to the clerk. The judge adjusted her glasses, brows furrowing as she flipped through the first few pages. Behind me, I could hear a whisper ripple through the crowd. The presiding IRS agent leaned forward, eyes scanning faster than mine ever could. It was all there. Every transfer, every forged ledger, every wire to the offshore accounts registered under shell corporations in Belize and Cyprus. And most damning of all, the emails. Tessa's signature on falsified statements. Nathan's name authorizing consulting fees paid to non-existent firms. Valerie's gallery laundering the proceeds through fake sales. I took a breath and looked at Tessa. Her mouth was parted, slightly confused. Then her eyes darted toward the judge's bench as if that might save her. She whispered something to Nathan, who was already turning gray beneath his tanned skin. Judge Marlowe cleared her throat and called for quiet. Then she said it. The 5 words that dropped like a hammer. This is a criminal matter. Gasps. A few chairs scraped. Tessa stood up like she'd been stung. What is this? She snapped. This wasn't part of. Her voice broke off when 2 uniformed officers entered from the side. I didn't need to turn around. I knew they were for her. Miss Prescott, one of them said calmly, please place your hands behind your back. Tessa laughed. The kind of laugh you hear at the edge of a cliff when someone realizes gravity doesn't care about pride. She looked to Nathan. He didn't move, She looked to Elaine. Elaine was frozen, eyes blank. She even looked to Valerie, who clutched her purse so tight her knuckles turned white. "Are you seriously arresting me right now, in front of everyone?" Tessa cried. "For what? Some dumb spreadsheets." She turned to me. "You think this makes you better? You think this fixes anything?" She was crying now, ugly crying. The kind that ruins mascara and makes the whole room feel like it's shrinking. The officer repeated the instruction. Tessa backed up, knocking over a chair, and that was when they stepped forward and took her by the arms. "You're going to regret this," she shouted as they cuffed her. "I did it for the family. For us. You think you're so clean, Camille. You're not. You're not." The door shut behind her like a book closing. A pause stretched over the room, long enough for the silence to settle deep in the chest. The judge looked at Nathan next. "Sir, I've been advised to inform you that the Department of Treasury has issued a temporary asset freeze. You are not permitted to move any capital, liquid or otherwise, until the matter is reviewed by federal authorities." Nathan didn't say anything. He just stared at the floor. For a second, I wondered if he even heard her. Then I saw it. His hand twitching on the armrest. Barely, but it was enough. I turned to Valerie, who had slipped halfway toward the aisle. She stopped when she saw me watching. Our eyes met. Hers were wild, calculating. She looked toward the press seated in the back row, their phones still recording notes, scribbled microphones hot. "You won't recover from this," I said quietly. "Not in the way you think. The buyers may come back eventually. But the name they once praised has already started to rot." Valerie didn't respond. She just turned and kept walking. No one stopped her. But no one moved aside either. Then Elaine stood slowly, like her knees didn't quite know what her body was doing. She touched the pearls at her neck as if hoping they would save her from what was unfolding. "I never knew about the offshore accounts," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This wasn't my doing." An older woman in the gallery scoffed loud enough for heads to turn. "I didn't need to explain anything. Not this time. Not anymore." The papers spoke. The evidence carried weight. And I had done my job. Outside the courthouse, a small group had gathered. Reporters. Former clients. A few faces I vaguely recognized from charity galas long ago. Flashbulbs popped as I exited. I didn't stop to speak. I didn't pose. I wasn't there to celebrate. The sun was high, burning bright against the concrete, but it wasn't hot. Or maybe I was too numb to feel it. I walked to the car, waiting across the street, my shoes clicking with purpose. As I opened the door, my phone buzzed. A text from the IRS liaison. "Official proceedings against Valerie Grant's gallery and Elaine Prescott's philanthropic foundation are now underway. Your cooperation has been instrumental." I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I put the phone away without replying. I sat in the back seat, looked out the window, and let the city move around me. People walking, cabs, honking sirens in the distance. Life didn't pause just because someone's empire crumbled. And that was the thing. This hadn't been vengeance. It had been air returning to a space that had been suffocating too long. In the rearview mirror, the courthouse loomed behind me. Imposing. Silent. Still, I didn't look back again. He was already waiting by the marble pillars near the courthouse exit when I stepped outside, his tie, loosened hair, disheveled like he'd run his hands through it too many times. "Nathan." He took one step toward me, then paused, as if realizing he had no right to move closer. People buzzed around us, reporters shouted questions from behind the barricades, but the moment between us hung in a strange, suspended silence. I didn't speak, neither did he. I simply waited, curious what version of the man I'd married would show up this time. Finally, he exhaled sharply and asked the question I'd always known would come. "Why didn't you ever tell me about the trust? About the offshore accounts? The money?" His voice wasn't angry, not even resentful, just tired. Like a man who'd been playing a game and only now realized he never knew the rules. I watched him carefully. For once, he wasn't performing. There was no edge of smugness, no attempt to dominate the conversation or spin the narrative. Just a man undone by the weight of what he never saw coming. "Because you never really wanted to know," I said quietly. "You needed to believe I was the lucky one in the marriage. The grateful one. The dependent. He swallowed, his jaw tensing, but he didn't deny it. You let everyone believe I was just some clever little trophy with a sharp brain and no roots. And I let you. Because I needed to see what you'd do when you thought I had nothing. And he looked straight at me, eyes bloodshot and honest in a way that might have meant something years ago. You became the kind of man who needed to stand taller by shrinking the people around you, including me. I thought you loved me, he said, voice barely audible. I did, I said, but not the version of me you loved. His face fell, and for a brief second I saw the boy he must have once been. Ambitious, insecure, hungry. But not cruel. Not yet. Elaine appeared, then flanked by two of her country club friends who conveniently pretended they didn't know her. She walked slower than usual, heels clacking a little too sharply against the pavement, pearls gleaming under the gray Portland sky. She didn't speak right away. Just stopped a few feet away, eyes scanning me like I was a riddle she still hadn't solved. I thought she might offer a cutting remark. Some parting jab about betrayal or bloodlines or what a disappointment I'd always been. But instead her gaze softened slightly and then she turned away. That was it. No apology. No confrontation. Just quiet acknowledgement that her version of control had evaporated with the truth. She walked off without looking back, and none of the reporters followed her. No cameras flashed in her direction. The silence that followed felt heavier than any insult she could have hurled. Nathan glanced between me and his mother, then said, almost to himself, I don't think I ever really saw you. I nodded, not bitter. Just tired. I know. So what now? That was the question, wasn't it? I took a breath, adjusting the strap of my bag over my shoulder. Now I go live the life I built before any of you knew I existed. I have a company to rebuild, people who believe in me. And peace that doesn't ask for permission. His voice cracked slightly when he asked, was any of it real? I turned to him one last time. The part where I stayed even when I knew better, that was real. But love that demands you shrink isn't love, it's leverage. I didn't wait for his response. By the time I made it to the street, a light rain had begun to fall, soft and clean, as if Portland itself wanted to wash away the past few years. A black town car waited by the curb. Inside, Mark sat with his laptop open, tie off, sleeves rolled, tapping away at something he'd probably rewrite 3 times before he let me see it. When I climbed in, he didn't ask what happened. He just looked at me and gave a quiet nod. I leaned back against the seat, watching the courthouse disappear in the rearview mirror. The city moved on around us, unaware that something irreversible had just ended. Or maybe it had begun. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt clear. Some endings don't need trumpets, just doors that no longer open. And some people don't need revenge. Just the grace to walk away before the fire consumes them too. The gallery smelled of fresh paint, soft leather, and something faintly sweet like orange blossom. 3 months had passed since the trial, but it felt like an entire lifetime had bloomed between then and now. My name hung in gold letters across the entrance of the Seattle Modern Arts Pavilion, Camille Prescott. Untamed Fire. That night, I wasn't anyone's fiancé or fallback or stepping stone. I was the artist, the founder, the storm. Inside, the main hall pulsed with quiet awe. A slow-moving crowd circled around the centerpiece of the show, a 20-foot mixed-media sculpture of a wild horse mid-leap, its mane flaring like flames, hooves cracking the last threads of a broken chain. Wild horse. It had taken me weeks of sleepless nights to build her. And when she stood upright in the center of that room, I cried, not because she was finished, but because I had finally started. Journalists hovered near the base of the sculpture, murmuring into mics, jotting notes. Critics I used to study in art school stood in small clusters, whispering things I never dreamed they'd say about my work. One of them, a woman in a dark green blazer, turned to her colleague and said softly, "This doesn't just speak, it howls." Behind the main wall, we had set up a small stage and microphone. A white sign to the right read, "In support of women rising from financial abuse, all proceeds from Untamed Fire will go toward the Emberlight Fund." I stepped up when the time came, feeling the soft spotlight warm my face. Cameras clicked. The room stilled. I spoke plainly, just as I had written it in my journal that first night alone in Bali. That there is a violence that doesn't bruise the skin but hollows the spirit. That when a woman is told she's only valuable as a mirror, eventually she stops recognizing her own reflection. That I had almost believed them. Almost. But our creation was rebellion. So I rebelled. And I would keep doing so. Afterward, they asked questions. A young reporter from a local station raised her hand, eyes bright behind round glasses. "Camille, do you think you've forgiven them?" I smiled gently, watching the sculpture's shadow ripple against the wall like firelight. Forgiveness is not about setting them free. It's about untying the anchor around your own ankle. So I forgave them, not for them to sleep better, but so I could fly. There were murmurs of agreement, a few tears. A round of applause rose slowly and built, echoing through the rafters. Nathan had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for financial fraud, wire tampering, and obstruction of justice. His lawyer had tried to argue diminished capacity, but the emails told the story better than any defense could. Valerie's company folded 3 weeks after the verdict. Investors pulled out, her assets were frozen. She'd filed for bankruptcy under a shell LLC and disappeared from social media. Elaine, perhaps the most surprising of all, withdrew quietly into a gated property in Napa. She hadn't spoken to the press once. A single bouquet of white calla lilies had arrived anonymously at the gallery on opening day. No card. Tessa's civil trial was still ongoing. I had chosen not to testify again. My attorneys had all the documents they needed, and I had nothing left to say to her. She had sent a letter, long and tearful and looping in tone. I never opened it. I left it sealed in a drawer because sometimes silence is the only answer someone has earned. Mark was there that night, standing near the edge of the crowd, hands tucked in his pockets, watching me with that quiet steadiness that had drawn me to him in the first place. He had never asked me to be smaller. Never resented the fire. He had only asked one thing, that I not dim myself to fit into anyone else's cage again. After the speeches and the tour, after the champagne had run dry and the guests began to drift out under the falling night, I slipped off my heels and stepped outside onto the back terrace. The air smelled like rain and cedar. The city buzzed in the distance, but here in this moment it was still. He joined me a minute later, offering a glass of water instead of wine. I took it, grateful. "You did it," he said. I'm just starting." We stood like that, not speaking, just breathing in the night. There's something about surviving that no one tells you. It's not loud. It's not a finish line with confetti. It's soft and slow, like growing new skin. You carry scars, sure, but you carry strength too, that horse inside the gallery. She wasn't just me. She was every woman who had been told she was difficult, dramatic, too much. Every girl who had been used, silenced, rewritten. She was rage and rebirth. And she would never be bridled again. I think that's what freedom really is. Not revenge, not victory. Just the ability to choose how your story ends, and I chose this. If you've ever been underestimated, erased, or called worthless, and you stood anyway, spoke anyway, dared anyway, leave a single dot in the comments below. Your story matters. And you deserve to see yourself in stories like this.